Hi, welcome to A Week in Green. In this week's episode we will be discussing the climate change conference held in Durban.
Durban?
Durban!
I thought you said bourbon, you mug.
No, I'm talking about Kyoto Round 2.
More like Kyoto round poo. What a palaver. 15,000 tonnes of CO2 for the conference, and that doesn't include flights of 13,000 delegates.
You really are a miserable polar bear. You're not even real! Anyway, I'm not going to talk to you any longer because someone else is going to be talking. Not you, you boring thing.
Save the ice!
India and China wanted the more vague legal outcome because this would allow a more loose treaty on cutting carbon. The EU insisted on protocol or legal instrument. In the end, a compromise was found of an agreed outcome with legal force. Here with us today we have Jonathan Essex from the Green Party to discuss this in more detail.
Hi Jonathan, thank you for joining us again for A Week in Green. Last month, stakeholders from all around the world attended Durban to discuss the climate deal. Let's face it, it didn't exactly go according to plan for a lot of Greens. It's common knowledge not everyone agreed, and quite a few people that attended this conference came out with an interesting set of quotes. There was a statement by Aldin Mayer of the Union of Concerned Scientists, and what he basically stated was that while governments avoided disaster in Durban, they by no means responded adequately to the mounting threat of climate change. The decisions adopted here fall well short of what is needed. It's high time governments stopped catering to the needs of corporate polluters and started acting to protect people. Powerful speeches and carefully worded decisions can't amend the laws of physics. The atmosphere responds to one thing and one thing only: emissions. The world's collective level of ambition on emissions reductions must be sustainably increased, and soon. What do you think those words really kind of heard? I mean, according to what you were saying, in many ways, it's just we've been overshadowed by the Eurozone crisis, and as well as actually people sort of dilly-dallying around, especially heads of state, concerning the issue of actually trying to make more cuts in carbon emissions.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the priorities in the government are trying to cut the deficit economically rather than to cut carbon emissions. And it's like there's one very big priority for the government at the moment, which is what it does with its finance, and one very small priority in comparison, which is what we do about our future. And it would be nice to maybe turn it around the other way. And well, I think it's not just nice, it's essential. We need to say, where are we going? And is that going to be socially sustainable? Is that going to be environmentally sufficient in terms of dealing with climate change, and also living within the amount of resources we use, whether it's rare metals to go into rare earth metals going into mobile phones, or the amount of wood which we use. And then economics can be the means with which we design our society, which allows us to get to where we need to be going. Whereas at the moment it seems to be that we decide what we're doing now, and then we just quickly check to see whether or not we've actually changed direction or not, and we really haven't. We're pretty much heading in the wrong direction. Still.
It's funny, we've mentioned that in terms of how Durban could have been much more. In terms of actually pushing across something more, holding. But you still have people, let's say heads of state, for instance, the European Commissioner for Climate Action, still put it in a glowing action. In fact, what she said was that where the Kyoto divides the world into two categories, we will now get a system that reflects the reality of today's mutually independent world. And as we are independent, what we promised to do must have the same legal weight. With an agreement on the roadmap towards a new legal framework by 2015 that would involve all countries in combating climate change, the EU has achieved its key goal, the Durban Climate Conference. We know the EU is making much more of an effort, or trying to make more of an effort to make cuts, but one particular region of the planet is not really enough to make successive change in carbon emissions. So it may just be that a handful of countries, even for instance within the European Union, that actually try to make this a stab at sort of cutting emissions. But obviously the more the sort of the whole world behind you would certainly be much more than just one particular region of the planet.
I think as long as we see that all of our issues are in economics, and climate change is one small issue rather than the other way around, then it's not going to work. I mean, the issue of climate change has to affect how we look at the amount of resources we use, whether we count in our emissions what's made in China, or whether that's China's fault that they sell stuff to us. Well, if it's China's fault and therefore they decide not to sell anything, then where is our manufacturing industry to provide for the things which we need instead? So if it's only China's responsibility, then why aren't we doing something about creating a new economy to reuse better what we've got already, and to reduce the amount of resources which we require to be imported from places like China in the first place?
And you mentioned a very, very valid point on China, because it's one of the largest polluters, and in fact, the papers have pretty much sidelined them as the sort of not the nasty ones, but the sort of them in the US and India, even though you have these countries that are sort of like really not sure about the whole climate deal, but saying that they will do something. I mean, it's I find it kind of funny that the outcome is like, we've got this deal, but you've got these major polluters that are not really going to commit to anything to making a system change, and putting a target of 2020, as you mentioned later on, is that you never know what's going to happen.
Well, for example, if you've got South Africa's got a fairly rich white population and a lot poorer indigenous population. And if the negotiations in Africa represent more of the elite population, who want to retain their lifestyle, then they can use the fact that they're a so-called developing country overall to not have any real actions to reduce the carbon emissions of those who live the lifestyle of the West in what is a developing country. And what it comes down to is only a few countries where the interests of all people will be drastically affected by climate change in the shorter term, whether it be Bangladesh or Maldives. Only they are really negotiating with a government that represents fully the interests of the whole population. And what you end up with is a situation where a group of politicians and representatives who may be heavily lobbied by industry and interests come to an agreement without really fully reflecting what's needed for the future generations. And we've got a New Earth Summit coming up this year, Rio Plus 20. One question I think will be whether, like an ombudsman for future generations, or some kind of wider consideration than just a bit of justice now and a bit more money to throw at climate change is needed. I think we need a different approach that says, do we love our children enough to rethink the way we run our society and live our lives today?
I mean, I especially like the bit when you're talking about developing countries, because obviously developing countries are the ones that are going to be hit hardest. And you mentioned Bangladesh, you've worked there. During your time working there, I mean, what kind of did you witness or work in areas whereby there had been issues of environmental problems, as a result of climate change, like for instance flooding? I know it's a real big thing in Bangladesh, and that can have a devastating impact on communities.
Well, I was in Bangladesh during the summer of 2004, when it was a 1 in 10 year monsoon, which meant that Dhaka was under best part of a metre of water for around 6 weeks. The price of water purification tablets doubled in a week because people were making money out of that. I visited a village on the edge of the Brahmaputra, which is halfway up from Dhaka to Tibet, where all the water comes down from the Himalayas. And I visited a village to look at how we can do rural sustainability and local governance improvements at the same time. Well, that was all very well, but 2 weeks after I was there, the river broke its banks and widened by 10 kilometres overnight.
Go on.
And if that water flows at sort of 5 or 6, 7 or 8 knots, it deletes villages. And the paper described 3-paragraph lists of villages which no longer exist. People didn't die, but they will be going back and starting their lives all over again. A 1 metre rise in sea level would potentially increase the severity of those monsoons, because the storm surges from the sea and the flooding from the rivers would amplify in their severity. And if India is building a more secure border with Bangladesh, then what is the options for those people? So I see a country which is radicalising because it needs to protect its interest to survive, doesn't have any real options, And I had a discussion with a guy who was riding a rickshaw. He pointed to his house, which looked like a house on stilts in the middle of a lake. The lake didn't exist there 2 months earlier, but that's where he was.
Yeah.
The electricity was drawn from above, quite good, because the house was on stilts in the middle of a lake. And he would be listening through clever reprogramming of a TV to Premiership football or county cricket. And I mentioned climate change, and he said, well, when we've got problems, the West comes and sorts it out. So he as a person in Bangladesh's capital city, maybe it's less so in the rural areas, but in the capital city, is very much expecting that this is the responsibility of rich countries to make sure that all countries have a future. So I was challenged at that, and challenged personally that should I be doing road maintenance and poverty reduction projects in Bangladesh, or should I be properly engaged in doing something to change how we live in the West, so that those people actually have a future.
Very challenging circumstances, and to have that mindset, to think is actually in a way kind of scary. To think that people think, oh, okay, someone else will sort it out for you. The West will come out as a big brother and look after you. It's just quite a scary mindset, in my opinion, to think that although we do have a responsibility as developed countries to make those changes, that people don't really know that people are relying upon us to make those changes and leaps in improvements.
I think the same challenges exist within the UK. Quite often we look upon the government or big business or someone else at some time to make the difference, rather than saying, well, no, actually everyone can have a role to play. We can all stand up. We can all make a difference in this world. The opportunity is there for the taking rather than there for the giving.
I think you mentioned that there are certain places in the world that have suffered from the impacts of climate change, and obviously there are those that are completely opposed to the idea that it exists anyway. But putting it into context from the UK, what does this really mean, do you think, in terms of what does Durban mean to the UK, apart from the European Union sort of taking much more responsibility in carrying on reducing emissions? I mean, how does it impact the end user? Does this just purely mean a price rise in fuel and more hardship on people, or is there the opportunity to make change as well as actually sort of diversify where we got our energy from, even though we've got some of it coming from renewable sources?
I don't think so far international commitments are putting enough pressure to require countries to do things differently. So I think what we need to do is to make sure we work within and as part of Europe to build a strong European-wide response. So that encourages us at a national level to put things in place, and perhaps some of the best measures which have come about recently on the environment have been at a national and European level. The UK has got a Climate Change Act, which is legally enforced, legally binding in the UK, and the European Union has similar targets for introducing renewable energy across the continent. Now, they may not be sufficient, but they are the best we've currently got.